Ok, muito boa tarde a todos. Vou pedir a vossa autorização para retirar a máscara apenas enquanto falo. Bem-vindos a todos a esta que é a última palestra das 6 sessões da capacitação em Gestão e Liderança de Sustentabilidade. Estamos aqui presentes no TERI9, na terceira, com muito gosto, reunidos. Temos uma situação fora do comum, estamos todos agora habituados já a fazer isto via digital, mas aqui temos não só a nossa sala com os nossos empresários participantes neste programa, mas também alguns dos empresários que não puderam viajar a juntarem-se a nós remotamente e também os nossos oradores que se juntam a nós do Reino Unido remotamente. Antes de apresentar os nossos oradores, vou convidar o Fábio, porque vem falar em nome da direção da SEDEA, para vos dar as boas-vindas a esta palestra.
Olá, boa tarde a todos, boa tarde a quem está online conosco também. Apenas umas breves palavras para dar boas-vindas aqui a mais uma palestra de Gestão, Liderança e Sustentabilidade. Desejar aqui todos um bom dia de trabalho, em nome da direção e administração da SEDEA, e que Aproveitem bastante quem está online e quem está também aqui na Ilha Terceira. Sejam muito bem-vindos. Grande parte aqui dos empresários que vieram de São Miguel também. Ok? Uma boa tarde a todos. E dos outros, desculpa. O Henrique da Horta, é verdade. Mas Henrique disse em grande parte. Muito obrigado a todos também. Bom trabalho. Bom trabalho.
Muito bem. Eu ia então apelar a quem nos está a ver em casa e via Facebook que façam as vossas perguntas pelo chat do Facebook, nos comentários desta transmissão ao vivo que nós temos, e nós faremos o possível para as colocar às nossas oradoras no final. Como de costume, a palestra durará 45 minutos a 1 hora e depois teremos meia hora a 45 minutos para perguntas e respostas e debate no final. Como por Zoom participam apenas os empresários inscritos na capacitação, aqueles que nos seguem via Facebook terão que o pôr por escrito. De qualquer das formas, seja por escrito, seja aqueles que aqui estão presentes, é possível que eu tenha que repetir as perguntas para se ouvirem como deve de ser via Zoom e, portanto, apelo a todos apenas um pouco de paciência para este modo virtual que estamos aqui a ensaiar hoje. And I'm going to switch to English now. I would like to welcome Jacqueline and Kirsten, our module leaders joining us from the UK. Thank you so much for being here today. We are very honoured to receive you. Jacqueline Lim is a systems advisor, consultant and coach enabling regenerative innovation and partnerships at the intersection of cities, business and society. She also leads on a new systems leadership program, Leading Collective Impact at She Leads Change. I would encourage everyone to look out for She Leads Change. These are major change makers happening on the cutting edge of existence right now. And partners closely with organizations including Liminal and the Finance Innovation Lab. Jacqueline brings experience from public policy, the startup and social enterprise world, sustainability-focused innovation and strategy with Fortune 500 companies, as well as multi-sector partnership building in cities. She is Singaporean by nationality and currently lives in London with her beautiful family. Kirsten van Eckert is a coach, facilitator and consultant, helping social enterprises, startups and scale-ups achieving sustainable growth. Her boutique business and transformation consultancy firm specializes in organizational development and culture, using permaculture principles and circular economy tools for designing healthy and successful businesses. She has also founded Amarok Organic, a sustainable pet food business with the aim of bridging regenerative agriculture, animal welfare, and climate change. Kirsten also participates in She Leads Change, co-creating and facilitating the Leading for Collective Impact program. We have a very excited Mario in the room because he runs a pet shop business, so I'm sure, Kirsten, you'll be sharing a lot of information with him. And I am, without further ado, going to transfer the microphone across to Jacqueline. Our viewers at home via Facebook will be alternating views between our Zoom transmission and some of the live camera action that we are getting over here as well. So, Jackie, Kirsten, welcome, and over to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Joanna, for the introduction. It's a real honor for me to be here. A little bit strange that I can, well, at least I can see quite a few of your faces gathered in Terceira over in the Azores, and who knows who else is joining us on Facebook. But hello to all of you. A huge thank you also to the Azores Business Development Society. Without your support, we wouldn't be here, so thank you very much. If you just bear with me and just give me a few moments to share my screen and my slides, and then I will begin. Great, so as that's loading, I first wanted to tell you a few things about myself. I began my life as a social worker working in Singapore in the government with young people, young offenders. I worked in child protection, in policy with low-income families. And I don't know if you can recognize the first picture on the left. That's a very classic, maybe not the most popular type of image from Singapore, but definitely an image of what a regular household in Singapore would be living in one of these high-rise apartment blocks. The picture in the middle is of a city in India, Bangalore. And I spent a few months there whilst I was doing my MBA, actually here in the UK, but I went over to India to spend a few months looking at business models with the base of the pyramid. And I was very fortunate to work with Nokia there for a few months. And that was kind of part of my journey as well. And the image on the right says Oxford Circus Station. This is a city in London. As you can see, it's completely empty. This was a photo taken as lockdown began here in London. But I've been here in London for a bit more than 8 years now, almost 10 years actually. And for the first 8 of those years, I had the privilege of working at an amazing organization called Roland, working alongside John Elkinson, who created or came up with the term, the triple bottom line, many of you would have heard of before. And there we worked with global business and also cities to try and drive more radical, sustainable change. So all of these are very, very urban settings, very different to the beautiful islands of the Azores, which many of you are from. And so I'm very, very jealous. But also I wanted to say that because, you know, the background I have, the settings I come from, that I live in, is so different to yours. And so I might have blind spots. So in a way, please just listen to what I have to say with curiosity, but also I would love to hear about your examples and your experiences later in our session today. So at the start of 2019, just last year, I started on a new part of my journey, trying to understand how is it that pivotal shifts can happen? Like, what does it take for the change you want to see in the world happen? What does it take? And that led me to become part of a number of different inquiries and experiments to try and find some different answers. And I'll introduce some of these later in the presentation. So today, my goal is to just share some observations, some provocations about what it means to collaborate, what it means to work collectively. Please I do welcome your questions along the way, which I'm sure we'll have a little bit of time to respond to at the end of the presentation. So please feel free to input your questions, perhaps on Facebook if you can, and if you're on Zoom to use the chat function. Great. So, right. So one of the common threads across all my work so far is that all those issues, all those problems I've been working on in these different settings have all been wicked problems. What are wicked problems? There are problems that typically defy being solved. It's very tricky to solve them. And that's because of a number of reasons. One, the information we have about these problems tends to be incomplete. We don't always know the full picture. These problems are also usually interconnected with a wider set of problems. So if you do something here, it might create an impact over there, which you didn't expect, for instance. They usually also involve a very diverse set of stakeholders, all with different opinions, and definitely no single idea, no single solution on its own works. You usually need a whole combination of different solutions working in tandem together. So some examples of wicked problems might be global warming, the current climate crisis we're in, perhaps the food, water, energy nexus, obesity, race, which is, you know, very much a challenge that is front of mind for many of us all over the world now. and definitely this global pandemic that we're in right now, and it's not just a pandemic in itself, but of course the economic consequences, let alone the health consequences from the pandemic. All of these are wicked problems. And if you look at the image of the SDGs at the bottom of the page, I mean, arguably, that is one mega set of wicked problems all coming together. They all in some way impact upon each other. So it's clear that collaboration is needed. And in this talk, I'm also going to propose an additional term with you. If some of you might have noticed the title of my presentation, it's around leading collective impact. And so before I kind of go on to share some examples with you, I wanted to share some ideas and some thoughts about what I mean when I say collective, and perhaps how is that different or maybe kind of related to what it means to work collaboratively or to collaborate. So I've had the privilege of knowing the Future Fit Foundation for some time now. They were set up maybe in around sort of 2011, 2012. And they were set up with the goal of trying to challenge the dominant thinking in business at that time, which was the fact that even though there's widespread acceptance that business has a role in society, many businesses were still driven, or they still saw their overarching responsibility as being answerable to only their shareholders. So that's very much the first part of the image you see there on the left. And over time, you know, even with John Elkington and his triple bottom line concept, the thinking evolved, and yet many businesses were still maybe just taking more of a selective response to the SDGs, where they would focus on areas where the company's current business model was already intersecting with some societal needs. So as an example, like say, take a pharmaceutical company, for instance. They would say, we choose to focus on SDG 3, health, because clearly we make medicines, so we're addressing the SDGs. Well done, great. But what about the water it takes for this company to manufacture its medicines? Perhaps in a water-stressed area, that might be the case. And if so, this company, through their manufacturing of medicines, might in some way be undermining or impacting on SDG 6, which is around clean water. And more so if their medicines are being produced by low-wage workers, you know, who maybe aren't paid a living wage, then perhaps this company is also slowing down progress on SDG 1, which is around no poverty. So you know what? So you're beginning to see all the different interconnections, and so the realities business is part of this complex web. And Jack Kendall, the founder of Future Fit Business Benchmark, he talks about going for a more holistic business, and that's really the image on the right, where business really needs to be working in a way that helps, that isn't just looking after its own interests, and you know, it's also helping people and planet to flourish, to thrive, you know, and regardless of the positive impact that they might be having, that they're also taking care not to slow down progress in other areas. So I really encourage, if anyone's interested, look at the Future Fit Business Benchmark. They have a whole bunch of really useful tools that could be helpful for you. Another way of looking at the collective is to consider the places that bind some of us together. You know, in the Azores, all of you are bound by that land that you live on, that you stand upon. Some of you would have heard of Kate Raworth and her best-selling book, Donut Economics. She's since been translating her book into a practical set of tools that cities and regions, really any place, you know, and the people of any place, tools that people can, or places can use to apply the principles of donut economics. So for those of you who are not familiar, the inner ring of the donut really sets out the minimum standards we need for people, for society to thrive. So things like health, education, so on and so forth. The outer ring of the donut represents really the ecological ceiling, so the planetary boundaries, and the idea is we need to try and operate in that space between the two rings of the donut, and to try and make sure that not just everyone's needs are met in the middle, but that also we live within the means of our planet. And so this image that you see on the screen is something I've taken from one of the new tools that Donut Economics Action Lab has launched starting in the city of Amsterdam. And it's called the Thriving City Portrait. So basically in the city of Amsterdam, they've announced that they're going to use the donut model to mend their post-COVID economy. And with this Thriving City Portrait, basically the question that they asked all their stakeholders, all their citizens who gathered, was to say, how can our city be a home to thriving people in a thriving place while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet, which might be quite a lot to take in. But again, really encourage you to go and check out this really, really brilliant resource and get some inspiration from yet another way to think about the collective. One more, before I go into the examples, one more way of thinking about the collective is around collective intelligence. And I think that's a term that's become more popular in maybe the last 2 or 3 years. So since last year, I've had the privilege of working with, or being part of a global collective intelligence network called Liminal. You can see some of our faces on the picture on the left. It's made up of people from all walks of life, all sorts of backgrounds, and it's become a very exciting space to test and grow new ideas. One of our very first projects last year was with Nesta, who are a UK innovation foundation, alongside the UNDP Accelerator Lab. And together we tried to explore the concepts of collective intelligence, which we defined as mobilizing people, data, and technology to tackle complex challenges. The output of this project was really a playbook. This cover page of that playbook is in the image right in the middle of your screen. And that's now been rolled out to over 80 of the UNDP's accelerator labs all over the world. So that's really, really exciting, and it's free to download for anyone who's interested. And in the playbook, there's a whole bunch of different tools, tactics, methods for how to bring people together, how to make use of data, how to use technology responsibly to somehow create new ideas, new strategies for solving some of these complex challenges. There are also some really exciting case studies in the playbook for those of you who are interested. So if I come back to a term that perhaps more of you might be familiar with, collaboration, working collaboratively. This is all well and good, and I think there's definitely so many really, really brilliant examples of good collaboration that happens. I think my own reflection, if I think back across my entire career, the times when I've been involved, numerous times I've been involved in all sorts of different collaborations and partnership building type of activities, sometimes it is not as effective as it can be for a couple of reasons. The people may be coming together to collaborate. In a way, the dominant viewpoint, the mindset they have is that they come to collaborate, but they bring, they see themselves as distinct, as diverse, as distinct, as independent. So I tried to represent that with all these little yellow little circles, and they're all, yes, connected to the main topic or initiative that they're coming together to solve, but they're there in their own capacity. They're there with their own, perhaps, agenda even. There's almost this underlying mindset of competition. I'm sure some of you might have experienced that before, like you're not quite sure who else is around the table, and there's this sense of we need to try and show off our knowledge or kind of let people know our expertise in this area. And so silos might be maintained, and you get the gist. And so not to say that this happens all the time, but that can be one pitfall of some occasions when people come together to collaborate. And I think my reflection more recently, and this is, partly through the work at Liminal, but very much more so my experiences leading this new program that Joanna mentioned earlier at CD Change around collective impact. I think my thinking on collaboration has definitely evolved. And so if you look at the image on the right, first of all, it's appreciating that those topics, those challenges in the middle of that circle, it's not just one topic. We have to be mindful of all the interconnections and try to appreciate the systemic view of those challenges and how they all connect to each other. But also, if you notice the circle that I've drawn around it, it is one circle, and this idea of lots of, different entities coming together with a focus on not just trying to solve the problem, but also trying to understand the relationships between them and spending time to nurture those relationships, building trust, for instance. And even if some of us might have differences in opinions, how do we work with those differences? How do we be curious about it even? And that circle is also with a dotted line, because I think the collective as an idea is definitely not static. And this idea of it being permeable, perhaps new people, new stakeholders, other voices that maybe we haven't noticed before, we need to always be creating space for other voices to also enter our circle. So this is just a framing on how I'm currently thinking, and I think there are merits to both ways of working, and if there are ways where we can bring both models forward, we can incorporate both models forward, I think that feels like a meaningful way to go towards. So in the next few slides, I'm going to share a few examples with you from different geographies, different industries that all sit somewhere between the spectrum of working collaboratively and working collectively. I think this is definitely a work in progress for all these organizations, so I wouldn't say any of it is necessarily best practice in itself. And also I invite you to bring some curiosity as you listen to these examples. What inspires you? Maybe you have a concern. That is all welcome. That is part of the learning journey, if you like, around what it means to work more collaboratively and collectively. So also, if you have any examples in the back of your mind, from your work or that you've seen in the Azores or elsewhere, please also hold them. We'd love to hear about them later during the Q&A. So without further ado, here's the first example I wanted to share. This first example features pre-competitive collaboration, which I think most of you or some of you might have heard of before. This particular example is of the Global Salmon Initiative, and it's made up of a collective of major farm salmon companies whose together, they make up about 50% of the global farm salmon sector. So a sizable number of sizable businesses. So they formed in 2012, and I think at that time there was some controversy around one or two of these particular companies who were really struggling with their environmental performance. The rest of them in the industry realized that actually the reputation of one company very much affects all of them. And so they thought, rather than using environmental performance as a means of competition they thought maybe we would fare better if we try and raise our collective performance as a sector, which is a simple and a really good idea. So just to give you a sense of the type of things that they've done since, so one of their challenges is the fact that the feed that they use to feed the farm salmon, a large proportion of that feed is made up of wild fish. So they're catching lots and lots of wild fish in order to feed the farm salmon, and that has a lot of negative repercussions for the ecosystem of the ocean. They knew they had to reduce their dependence on using wild fish. And so what did they do? They jointly tendered for a novel, for academics, for startups, for anyone to submit ideas for novel feed sources. And because they had scale between them, they were able to bring some of these new solutions to market much faster than they would have been able to do it if they were all working separately. So I really appreciate this quote by the CEO of one of the founding companies in GSI, and saying that for him, he realized that they had to try something more radical, despite the initial risk that they felt, that they saw in terms of working with their competitors. And it's really, really paid off for them. My second example is perhaps a little bit more counterintuitive, because we just talk about pre-competitive collaboration, and I put here competitive collaboration. So bear with me, and I'll be curious to hear what your thoughts are later on. But this example is of a company, H&M, global fashion company most of you would have heard of. Earlier this year, they announced a new service called Treadler, you see in the image there. And Treadler is essentially a B2B service which offers H&M's assets around its sustainable supply chain, also offering H&M's expertise around sustainable procurement, offering all of these expertise to other businesses, mainly in the fashion industry. So their aim was to say, we want to do something that can help not just ourselves, but actually all of, as many companies in the fashion industry as possible to overcome all the initial barriers that exist that sometimes prevent them from being more sustainable. And so, they offer things like access to recycled or sustainably sourced materials, or recycled, sustainably sourced cotton, etc. So, of course, there's some unanswered questions here. Are H&M's sustainability credentials good enough in the first place? I think that's a fair question. Definitely also a question of actually maybe the whole system of fast fashion needs to be overhauled. So is this in some ways prolonging the existence of the old model? Those are definitely unanswered questions. But for me, I found it quite intriguing in terms of the innovation that H&M's been engaging in by thinking about new business models that can help to drive financial and social environmental value for itself as well as for many of their competitors, and using that as actually a competitive advantage. So that's an interesting example. Again, we'll be really keen, perhaps maybe a bit more controversial, but I'll be keen to hear your thoughts later on. My third example is one that I was inspired when I was reading this report that Zolands published late last year on regenerative procurement. So as we all know, trying to stop deforestation and to create value from keeping forests standing, keeping them intact, that is such a wicked problem. In Brazil, the Amazons come under intense pressure of the last few years in particular. More and more people want to grow soybeans in Brazil because of the demand globally that has gone up for soy. There's also very lax enforcement of protection laws of the forest. So all these really, really difficult problems. What was really interesting is Origins Brazil basically saw an opportunity. They've set themselves up as a network that at its heart delivers a product certification scheme which guarantees the origin, the transparency, the traceability of products that use materials or resources from the Amazon, being able to trace all of that back to source. I think what's really exciting and different about what they're doing is that it's quite different from other certification schemes I've seen elsewhere, mainly because Origins Brazil have really involved local producers at the heart of, at the bottom of these, or the start of these value chains, if you like, involving them also on this platform, and they use a whole mixture of technology, distributed governance to make sure that the information is accurate on the platform. But as a consumer, with your dashboard, when you kind of scan the code that you see on the bottom right corner of the screen, you immediately get not just some hard quantitative data about where the product's from and all sorts of percentages. You also get a real life story about this particular individual or their family or their community that's behind harvesting some of the resources that have gone into making this product. So in some ways, the collective here is not just collective in terms of the way they've been involving local communities, but also collective in terms of bridging between the consumers and the producers and trying to build more and more connection between those two groups, which I found very, very inspiring. The fourth example, I was just checking my time to just see if we've got enough time, how many more examples can I include. Right, the fourth example is perhaps my favorite one, if I can be honest. This is an example of, that comes from a little coastal town here in the UK called Watchet. And in Watchet, back in 2015, the town's only industry and their main employer, which was this paper mill, so like a factory that kind of makes paper. This mill that had been in operation for 250 years, back in 2015, the mill closed down. What this meant was that the town lost more than 175 jobs. Their local economy, which used to be really thriving, really slowed down. And also, crucially, the town's identity was lost. So the town was really, really struggling. And the Onion Collective was a group that formed when a few locals decided to come together to take some action. So what they did was they engaged the rest of their community. They mapped out what their resources were in the community. They looked across Europe for other examples. And out of nowhere, they found this startup called Biome, BIOHM. And this startup Biome is a specialist in making biomanufacturing. And one of their technologies involves mushrooms. You see the image I put in the top left-hand corner. Well, these mushrooms have an underground root system called mycelium. And that mycelium eats up things underground. It finds nutrients to eat up. It can eat lots of different things. And from there, it grows new materials. And so the photo you see in the bottom left corner, that's an insulation board that can be used in construction, in building. And this insulation board is completely natural. It's completely, of course, completely biodegradable. And it's also very, very high performing. So Onion Collective thought, wow, that's an amazing idea. And fast forward 3 years later, Biome is now, well, has already built a biomanufacturing demonstration facility on the site of the old paper mill in this town, watch it. You know, and they use feedstock that comes from waste products, you know, waste that the local community generates, but also waste products from other factories, other industry in the wider region around the town. And all of that becomes a feedstock for this mushroom to grow insulation boards. You know, they currently employ 14 people. They're aiming to employ 200 employees over the next 5 years. I think what's really exciting in terms of the collective there, though, is about how this partnership has been structured. It's been structured in a way that really that keeps the community integral to the existence of Biome, the company in this town. You know, so for an instance, a good amount of their revenue that's generated is reinvested into the community. Also, Biome has a community panel, a bit like an advisory board or a board of directors, if you like, who oversee, you know, some of what they do at Biome. And for me, that's such an interesting example of how business can work so beautifully with community. This next example is about an island, one of the Spanish islands, Mallorca, and it features the work of someone I know, Daniel Christian Wall. And Daniel is a systems thinker. He's a systems practitioner. I have so much respect for him. He's been living in Mallorca for many years now, and the question that he was so passionate about is how he can help to shift the Mallorcan economy towards one that's regenerative, that's circular as an island, you know, which he refers to as a bioregion. And so a lot of his work has been about linking communities together with stakeholders, and for finding the new idea, you know, when they come together, a new idea happens, and it gets experimented, gets tested on. One of their ideas, which I thought was just fascinating, is something he began in 2013 when he worked with Forum for the Future, who are another think tank, alongside eCover, which is a global cleaning products company. And the idea is that they developed this thing called the Mallorca Glocal. You can see the little image there on the right side of the screen. Global and local innovation project for eCover. And they wanted to see, is it possible to create detergents and cleaning products that made almost entirely out of organic waste derived from the island, mainly through their agricultural activity, which is quite a moonshot. Idea at that time. They got involved also a satellite company that helped to provide all these very detailed land use maps of Mallorca to identify where are the olive grove plantations, where are the citrus plantations, try and identify the amounts of cultivated land, the density, and how suitable, where would be suitable to locate some of their manufacturing sites on. So it's so much to say, and I think, you know, the initial output was very, very promising. They had, if you can see, some prototypes of the products that they created out of the waste from Mallorca. You know, unfortunately, the initiative was put on hold because eCover had its innovation funding cut, which is very sad. But at the same time, I think it's shown some potential for what can happen when we bring different people together. And I love the idea of them really embracing the islands of Mallorca as a collective, not just the people, but the kind of the biological aspects of the island, of their system as well. So that's, again, yet another different example of the collectors. Let me just check on time, right? I'm going to speed through this last example I have, and then find a way to wrap up so that we can go into hearing a few other stories from a few guests I'm going to invite to the panel, but also to our Q&A. So this final example very quickly is of the Flanders region in Belgium. And there, Visit Flanders is almost a government agency responsible for tourism in Flanders. And, their Travel to Tomorrow movement that they created, they started last year, was really to try and shift both their thinking, but also the thinking of other tourism agencies all over the world, to not just see tourism as a numbers game, how many visitors arrive, how much money are our tourists spending in our region, but to begin to see tourism as a way to grow the net benefit for local inhabitants, for local business, but also for local heritage. And I would add to that kind of the local biodiversity, but also, and at the same time, create a meaningful experience for tourists. Very interestingly, they have this thing called Holiday Participation Center, which is really all about ensuring that local people, particularly those with a disability or who are kind of a low income, who come from a low income community, that actually all of them too can also take part and enjoy a holiday locally, even if it's for a day or for a short holiday. This scheme has so many volunteer organizations part of it, and more than 150,000 people from these low-income communities or who suffer from a disability. More than 150,000 of them are able to go on these short holidays every year, which I thought was just such an inspiring story. And a lot of this thinking has come from been inspired really by a woman called Anna Pollock, who founded Conscious Travel. And I don't have time to fully read out the quote that she has there, but hopefully some of you would have been able to look at it. And if not, I'm sure there's a way we can share the slides afterwards. So if I reflect on all these different case studies that we've been looking at, for me, there are a couple of principles that seem to be quite common. Principles about how we can work collaboratively, about how we can work collectively. The first one is about diversity, which is, I think quite an obvious one, but very hard to implement. And I think crucially here, it's not just diversity in terms of color, that's obviously important, but also diversity in terms of, bringing in people who might have a very, very different view or perception to us. How can we bring them into the conversation as well? The second principle is about interdependence. And that's all about recognizing that we are all connected. We have so much in common. We share a humanity. And that also we are interdependent with life itself, with nature. We need each other. Is my reflection about interdependence as a principle. The third principle is about transparency. I think that's about being open. And I guess the idea is, how do we create spaces where we can really share our deepest intentions with each other and connect at that level? I think that for me would be my high goal for what transparency looks like in the world going forward. The fourth principle is equity, or being equitable. And here it's, again, it's quite a challenging one, because even when we come together to collaborate, even when we come together to work collectively, how do we notice the power structures that are present even in our gatherings, And power structures meaning is somebody, whose voice here is the loudest and why is it the loudest? Can you be curious about that, for instance? And I think it's choosing not to ignore some of those structures that are in fact real barriers to collaboration. The fifth principle is it's place-based, it's local. I think part of my experience, particularly working at Volans and for a lot of my career, was we looked at global systems. We bring top CEOs together to try and solve the problems of the whole world, and actually realizing that all of us, by the basis of, the fact that we belong to communities that are already, that are right around us, we belong to places that we live in, we too have the power to act collectively and to create change where we are. We don't have to wait for the global powers to create change for us. We can't wait for that to happen. It won't happen that way. Well, some of it will happen that way, but we also need to work from the bottom up in the places that we belong to. And the final principle is evolutionary. I think the change that we want to see, thinking even about the SDGs, how do we achieve the SDGs? I don't think it's a straight line. We do this, then we do that, and then that will happen. We'll probably be going in quite a few circles. We'll be learning our way through all of this. And the world changes around us all the time. We're going to have to continuously be responsive, adapt, and to constantly ask what's needed now. How can we move forward from here? And that, to me, is very much an evolutionary process. So I just wanted to end off with sharing this slide, which I just have a lot of love for. I'm very, very inspired by it, and the idea here is we've been talking so much about how do we do the collaboration? How do we do the work? How do we do the collective work? But I think there's also an underlying question of how do each of us need to be in order to do that work, in order to lead collectively. And so Joanna was so kind to mention at the start of this session about She Leads Change, and I've got so much passion for the work that we're doing. We're essentially the beginnings of a global movement of wholehearted leaders that's trying to co-create a better future for everyone. And the way we're building this movement is through different programs that we run. We support each other. We're in ourselves a community of practice. And one of the programs I mentioned is the Leading Collective Impact program, which I have the privilege of leading. And this program was really inspired by that question at the top of the screen. How do we need to be to lead collectively? And what you see on the screen are some reflections from some of our participants, who were reflecting on their journey as they came to the end of the program just a few weeks ago. They're reflecting on what are the questions we're collectively holding, our heart. How do we bring our heart into some of this work? What are the skills? What are the things we can do with our hands? And what's the fire that's in our belly? What lights us up? What keeps us here? And being able to bring our whole selves into this work, which has been so inspiring. So the takeaway here is really that all of you are invited to lead collectively. We don't have to wait for global leaders. We don't even need to wait for our CEOs of our organizations. Each and every one of us can play a role, can activate collective action. However, in whatever small way or big way, all of that is good. So I wanted to end with a beautiful image, one of my favorite birds. It's a starling. I don't know if some of you have come across it before, but starlings take flight and travel long distances, not alone, they travel in a large group. And what you see here is known as a murmuration of starlings, and they're constantly, it's almost like a living system in itself. They're constantly adjusting to the wind conditions around them, to each other's movements, and they create new shapes in the sky. If you ever have a chance to witness it, it's just absolutely stunning. And coincidentally here, you see the formation that they've created instead of a bird, which I just found beautiful. So I'm just going to read a quote from Desmond Tutu, who's the former Archbishop in South Africa. One of the sayings in our country is Ubuntu, the essence of being human. Ubuntu speaks particularly about the fact that you can't exist as a human being in isolation. It speaks about our interconnectedness. You can't be human all by yourself. And when you have this quality, Ubuntu, you are known for your generosity. We think of ourselves far too frequently as just individuals separated from one another, whereas you are connected, and what you do affects the whole world. When you do well, it spreads out. It is for the whole of humanity. Wow. Thank you. It's tricky that I can't see everybody else's face.
No, you have to do it again, everybody.
People are still there. Thank you, Joanna. Can I invite, Joanna, stay there on the screen. And Kirsten, can I invite you to join us as well on the screen? So essentially, you've heard me talk on and on and on, and I'm conscious that it went on for quite a while. Hopefully that was useful in some way. But I'm also conscious that, while certainly I've not been an entrepreneur myself, all of my observations have in some ways been from the outside. And I thought it'd be really useful for the audience here to hear from people who have actually done the work as a business, trying to be part of solving wicked challenges, what it's like for them to collaborate. And so would love to hear from Joanna in a few moments, who of course have so much experience having founded Sustainazors, but also Kirsten, who's also happens to be a good friend of mine, a close collaborator of mine at She Leads Change. She's a very kind of wise thinker and practitioner in her own right around permaculture, around regenerative everything, not just business, literally everything. And she's also an entrepreneur with a startup called Amarok Organic. So I'm going to be interviewing both Kirsten and Joanna, but perhaps if I start with Kirsten first and then we come to you, Joanna.
Yes, if you don't mind, Jackie, I was just going to suggest
Sure.
that you focus on Kirsten, as we only have about half an hour until the end of our transmission. Over the next couple of days, we will have plenty of opportunity to speak more about this. And if I feel like I've got something to offer, I might cut across between you and Kirsten, but we could use perhaps this time a little bit more to hear from you and Kirsten. And then, of course, if we've got any questions in the room or over Facebook. I'm here nevertheless.
Perhaps we'll invite you to share one or two final words before we close.
Sure.
That would be amazing. So, Kirsten, hello. Do you want to tell us something, anything else about yourself before we launch into the questions?
I'm not sure, because Jana did such a lovely job. Thank you so much in the beginning to introduce me. I hope what you all got from this is that I'm actually a bit all over the place and do all kinds of things, just trying to incorporate my passion that I have for people and for the planet. And so everything I do, no matter in which direction it is, I try to incorporate that. But I think that should be enough about me. I'm not such an interesting person.
So, what keeps you awake at night, Kirsten? Is there a wicked problem?
Oh, there's so many wicked problems. But my actually wicked problem that I'm working on at the moment as an ecopreneur, I like to call it, it's not so much an entrepreneur that I am, is that I love dogs. So I don't know if many of you can relate to it. So I love dogs. I always had dogs. At the moment, I have two. And I am very, very concerned about their well-being, how to feed them so that they are healthy, that I don't exploit the planet by using ingredients from mass farming, for example, that I don't contribute to more plastic in the world because I buy food that is packaged in plastic. And yeah, all of these things keep me awake at night.
So, Amarok, tell us about Amarok. I'm also intrigued by the name. I've never asked you before, but tell us like the one thing about like how you came up with that name and what the significance is. So I don't think I know actually.
Okay, Amarok. Amarok is the Inuit word for wolf, and in the Arctic Circle, the biggest wolf in a pack, that is the Amarok. So a friend of mine actually came up with this name by saying, actually, it's for the wolf in your home, so to speak, the natural being. A dog has the digestive system of a wolf, so it should actually also eat a natural diet that, mimics what they have in nature, what a wolf would prey, and so that's where the name comes from.
So tell us a bit more about the business.
As I said, I had the business came out of a problem. So as I mentioned earlier, all these problems that I have, that usual dog food is really bad. Commercial dog food is really bad on many levels. So one level is it is not healthy for the dogs because it's cooked and it often has grains in it, which is really harmful for the dogs. Then the practices of producing them is very harmful to the environment. It's not very ethical usually. The market is dominated by 5 big brands. So I couldn't find anything that was good enough from my perspective for my dog. And so I switched to raw food, raw meat. But then I had the problem, my goodness, what I hate is mass farming. What I hate is industrial animal, exploitation. What I love and what I support is regenerative farming. So how can I now buy normal meat to feed my dog? That's not happening with me. So I had all these problems. Where do I get it? How can I afford it? It's obviously really expensive if I go out and buy any kind of organic food. So what I did is I started talking to farmers I knew in a very small part of the UK. And I asked them what they do actually with the waste they have. So if they have a lamb that they either slaughter directly on their farm or they give it to an abattoir. So what is with the offal, the organs? What is with offcuts? What is with all of that? And so they said, they actually have a real big problem because they don't know what to do with it and they have to pay for getting rid of it, so to speak. So it was the first step. I took the waste from the farmers directly. So first collaboration was with them. And so then I had this. And then I had the problem that if I wanted to travel, what did I do? It's a bit odd to have a suitcase full of raw meat with you, actually. So I started at home. I started to dry it. I cut it in small pieces. I minced it and then I just put it in. I had a small dehydrator for myself for vegetables. So I just put that in sheets. And then I ended up with little small pieces of dried meat, and it had exactly the same qualities as my raw meat, but it was convenient to transport. So that was the first thing that I could, so I solved my own problem, so to speak. And then lots and lots of friends came to me and said, oh, we wanted to, oh, can we have some, please? And so, yeah, at some point I just said, guys, I can't do this at home anymore. Let's try and make a business out of it. And this is where the challenges then really started.
Which is exactly where we're going. And I mean, you really talked about the very first collaboration, which is identifying that opportunity in terms of, working with farmers and taking the waste off their hands, so to speak, which is just ingenious. Tell us about the other collaborations, like what made you realize you had to, and what was the experience like?
Well, I had, the biggest problem was rules and regulations from the government. So if you handle, in the UK, if you handle raw meat directly from farms, you have to you have to jump through so many loopholes. This is unbelievable. So I was not able to find a production facility. So just a facility where I could take the meat, mince it, and dry it. That would allow me to start a real business and where they would allow me to sell it. So I needed to find a space where I could do this. And so I found a butcher, which is called Ethical Butcher. It's also a small business, and they share my values with regard to sourcing, so regenerative farming, but they produce meat for humans. And so I started working with them. And we ended up then actually having a triangle collaboration, because what they do is they pay a farmer for raising a whole animal. So they pay for the costs of raising it and they exactly say in a regenerative way. And then they take the whole animal, and then we share what I can use and what they can use. And we also collaborate with distribution, so that because I want to be carbon neutral. And so they have a box scheme. And when they send their boxes, they offer, if they have customers that have dogs, they offer mine as well. And the other way around, I obviously also promote their products. So yeah, that's what we do.
Amazing. So many more questions, but we want to make sure that other people can field their questions too. So perhaps one last question from me then. Is there one or two things, or maybe just what helped to make this collaboration work? And maybe what didn't help, what made it really, really difficult? Maybe one of each, if I can be tricky.
Yeah. Maybe focus on the difficult, because it always, it always sounds so nice. And then we hear all these examples of brilliant collaboration and collective ideas. But to be honest, it is pretty scary, because we live in a world with competition, and we live in a world where people steal ideas and God knows what. So being wholeheartedly transparent and try to collaborate with somebody also means it's a high risk of somebody else, because you're small, or in my case, I'm still very small. So everybody could just take my idea and make this. And then, I would lose out. So being open and courageous enough and say, okay, here are all my cards on the table. How can we work together? That was the scariest bit, to be honest. Luckily it paid off. It can also go wrong. So counter to that, like, what made it pay off? What made it go well? Was there something else that really helped to overcome some of those risks, that you talked about? I think being really careful in choosing to whom you speak, and try to figure out if people share your values. So if it's really honest and true what they say, that they want to make the same impact that you want to make. And so it took me a while to find these people. And then I had just a gut feeling that they would really, that they just share my values. And it was true.
Amazing. It kind of reminds me a little bit about, when we talk on the Collective Impact program, so much about relationships, and actually not just trying to work on the outcome that you want, but actually spending time to nurture those relationships in itself actually is part of the work of collaboration as well.
Yeah.
Jean, is there anything else you want to add, or should we go to questions? I can't see any on my screen.
I was actually about to interject, because we've had the opportunity to be here together this afternoon for a little while before we came online with you guys, and we were precisely talking with this group of 25 business people about the difficulties of collaboration, and the kind of trade-off between what we've witnessed with the COVID crisis, for example, of how individualistic some people in some nations have become, versus how collaborative and collective work has sort of really come to life and flourished in so many different prospects as well. And so everyone was talking about how keen they are to listen to you guys over the next couple of days on the tools and instruments that can facilitate that collaboration. But I think it's super important that we remember that the path of sustainability is one that takes us from codependence to co-responsibility. And I think this has been a theme throughout our 5 previous modules, and I'm sure we will continue to discuss this over the coming days. I don't know if there's anybody...
That's already a 7th principle to add to my list of 6. I'm writing that one down. Codependence to co-responsibility. I like that. Thank you.
So one very interesting pet shop owner looking at Kirsten's experience here. But I don't know if anybody in the audience, would somebody in the audience have a question to ask at this point? They are camera shy, they're saying tomorrow when there isn't people watching on Facebook and so on. I don't know if we can maybe switch the camera on for those of us those of us who are joining us online from the cohorts. Oh, here we are.
And also I wonder, Rosa is looking at Facebook. Is there any questions that are coming through on Facebook?
I was communicating with Kirsten. There are no questions.
We were busy in the background.
Different levels.
Either that or my voice put everyone to sleep, maybe. Hopefully not.
But I was also going to say that, when you were asking Kirsten at the outset what kept her up at night, and I would say that this very conundrum is what keeps me up at night, the fact that it is so important and so vital to collaborate and to cooperate, and yet it is also so difficult. So overcoming those difficulties and understanding how to best harness this energy of the collective is definitely a challenge for change. It was already one of the major changes of sustainability. It's now a major change of sustainability in a post-COVID context. And we've all been discussing this during this afternoon.
Yeah, I also... Sorry, Jack, go on. What I also wanted to say is that I'm often surprised about the knowledge of certain people. Some people are really, really interested in environmental topics. But then again, there's not so much information out there that is really valuable and really true. And so I think what each entrepreneur and ecopreneur and actually everyone involved in these topics, what we need to consider is educating people. Yeah, just telling stories, explaining what's going on. I have the feeling that that is so important. So to give you an example is we had a little market stall where we started selling, and there came people to me, they were vegans, and they were really aggressive with me and saying, how can you claim you are ethical if you still kill animals, and animals should, livestock should disappear, and we should only grow vegetables. And so it took me really a long time to explain to them that we need animals, but obviously in a completely different way, to regenerate our soils, and that a healthy soil actually also contributes to tackling climate change. But these, the longer implications and the bigger picture is often not there. And how can it be? Because who tells us about this? We don't learn this at school. So I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, bigger picture education.
Yeah, but also, I mean, Kirsten, just that simple example with someone provoking and clearly a conflict, like conflicting views there. But I think for you, what I'm seeing is for you to, instead of backing away, being able to stand up, not necessarily, of course, not being aggressive, but to be able to listen first and foremost, and kind of hear where people are coming from, and imagine, that's in the context of a market stall in probably a farmer's market or something like that, and maybe a bit hard, but if you can imagine doing that with wider communities, but over a period of time, this work, I think, takes time. I'm not sure if one conversation is going to change people's minds necessarily, but almost we need a combination of activities, different types of interactions, just different ways for people to get together, to have those conversations, and to share the stories in different ways.
But wouldn't that be another possibility for more collaboration? So, for example, with schools, educating kids, bring them out to a farm, maybe, whatever it is, So, yeah, it's more collaboration needed. Yeah,
and how wonderful if you could do that with a group of other committed individuals, and almost with that group versus just one-to-one connections. This connections start to go exponential as we add more and more people. So collective, like how can we change mindsets in our local area and start growing almost a collective movement slowly? But I do really believe it's got the power to go exponential as long as we start somewhere.
Can I ask a question to Joanna about exactly that? I know you run this Eco Lodge, and especially when we talk about education or knowledge of people. So, what does it mean, ecotourism, and how do you explain it to people? Is it easy for you?
Somebody has to unmute me.
Oh, can we not hear you?
Somebody has to unmute me.
Oh,
Okay, something doesn't work.
Somebody is not allowing me to speak. So.
Okay.
Try again.
Okay.
Here we go.
Yes.
I was not being allowed to unmute myself, so I was gagged. So, Kirsten, I was a little bit worried with the microphone, so I didn't quite hear you completely. You were talking about sustainable tourism. Could you please repeat the question?
I am just curious, as you run the Eco Lodge, how easy is it for you to explain to people what you do and what's so different and why it's so much better? Do you have the feeling it's easy? People know already what they want?
No, I don't. No, I don't think it's particularly easy. We do have a range of people who look for this product specifically. One of the things that we do is we have third-party verification. So we have a certification that is underwritten by the Global Sustainable Tourism Council, and we have over 400 criteria that we need to comply with to have a score, an international score, and so it's we are comparable against our peers. We also talk about it a lot, so that's mainly our selling point. So we target to people who are conscientious travelers, if you like. And I think that that's what's happening more and more in the region here as well. But I would just go back to Sustain Azores in the sense that it requires collaborative work. I mean, the Lodge does as well, don't get me wrong. We work collaboratively in a number of ways. We work with our local community, we receive schools and all kinds of other institutions that come and visit us. We run ecotourism and permaculture, urban permaculture walks, and we do a lot of environmental education in many ways. But with Sustain Azores, we have to deal with the governments, the public, citizens, private industries, and also NGOs and so on. And its very work sits on the premises of sustainability. And what I find generally is that people are willing to collaborate. We have a lot more in common than what we have pulling us apart. And so I have often found that people are much more willing to collaborate than what we give them credit for. And another of the things that we have spoken a lot throughout our course here in the last few weeks is few months, I should say. Now we've been through a bit of a time warp here. Was to do with what is important for achieving an objective is to align interests and reduce risks. And we've visited this module after module, and I think that with COVID, this has also become very obvious, right? That if we align our interests, and then we reduce our risks, and collectively we can reduce our risks even better if we are aligning our interests. So we are reducing our vulnerabilities by, as Kirsten said, choosing your partners well. So I would say that is the first rule of collaboration, is make sure you don't get in bed with somebody who wants to bite you. So maybe we can talk about that over the next few days.
I have here a question from Facebook.
I got everybody to laugh in the room now because I said about bed and bites, and these are all very mature business people.
There's a question from Facebook.
Yeah, from Lucia. In your opinion, when collaboration fails, is there some kind of mistake that is most committed?
When collaboration fails, what is the most common mistake for making collaborations fail? Well, I think Joanna was just talking about it, not choosing your partners wisely. I think there's so many different reasons, but the one that's come to the forefront of my mind right now is I still go back to the point about relationships, because if we approach collaboration as a task, and if we approach it purely trying to get to an outcome that I want, it will most likely fail. It will most likely fail. But if I approach collaboration and working collectively with, I'm interested, I have an intention for something to happen, not a very narrow set of outcomes, but like broadly, this is the direction I want. I'm curious in going towards, I'm passionate about. And then from there, going into collaboration with the idea of getting to know person X or whoever it is that you're beginning to talk to. And that person might have different ideas. That person might have a different viewpoint. And if I listen hard enough, there might be something there which could be even bigger or perhaps even better or more compelling than the outcome I initially might have been. You know, if I had been so preoccupied with just what I want, it will be very hard to see what else is possible when I have a more open mind. And so that is, you know, having an open mind, being curious, first and foremost, being curious in this person, this organization that you're entering, that you're testing out a relationship with, really trying to get to know them. And then from there, it will slowly become clearer and clearer what's possible. And that way, hopefully, also less disappointment in terms of all parties, because we have foundations to build on. We know each other. We can continue to build our relationship, even if maybe the initiative we're thinking about fails. We still have a relationship, and we can go on to try other things as well. Hello, we've got somebody else.
With a question, so.
A question.
Hello. Sorry, I have to take the mask. No, it's not a question. This is not. Am I?
We can hear you.
People are worried with my image. You know, they are worried with my image. Anyway, this is not not a question, but more kind of a comment to the question of Lucia. And I would say I have in my company in the main board. I have a say that says assumptions are the mother of all the problems. Yes. You know, and so that's one of the main mistakes in cooperative or collaborations or partnerships or whatever. So assumptions is one problem, and the other one is the expectations of the people who participate in your project. You know, so for example, when you have a startup or something and you are starting a project, when there's no money coming in, when it's just, you know, blood, sweat, and tears, when you are working hard and nights and overnights and people giving efforts, when there are still no results, people usually are all together and very strong. But when it starts to give you some money, then you get the problems, because then the expectations and the assumptions from each other, many times they, you know, eat each other and they are not the same. So this is the only comment I had, and good luck. Okay, thank you.
Good luck to all of us. Thank you. You have a very supportive cohort. I'm cheering you on. Joanna, I'm looking at the time. What's your sense on how we should?
We're looking to wrap up
pretty soon, but if you want to make some final comments or throw a challenge or a question to anybody either in the room or on Facebook as a finishing touch, after that I think we all need to start thinking about going.
I feel like I've spoken a lot, so...
Kirsten, do you have anything else to add?
Maybe just reframe the question that we just had about what goes wrong and why does it go wrong. Maybe think about the one crucial thing that you regard as the make or break for a good collaboration. I mean, we know there are so super many different topics. But for yourself, deep inside, what do you think is the most crucial thing for making a collaboration work? And then maybe we can talk about this tomorrow.
Will, right? I think where there's a will, there's a way. So communication, says Enrique over there. I don't know. Does anybody else in the room? Lobby. We have somebody saying lobby. That made Pedro smile on Zoom on the other side. We have to remember we have people on other islands. Anybody online, or Susanna from Inchco, we can't really see you. but we can hear you if you'd like to add anything.
Anybody else in the room have words to say what's a make or break for collaboration?
Trust, of course.
Ideals.
Ideals. Can you...
A contract.
A contract. So the trust has to be in binding terms.
Legal terms help.
Legal terms, so boundaries, clear boundaries, and João at the end asks whether these are hard or soft laws.
That's another problem.
Because we talked a lot about hard and soft law in general when we think about sustainability and what provokes change, what increases the change agency, right? Hard law versus soft laws.
Be clear and be honest.
Clarity and honesty from the bottom of the room. I keep repeating this because, of course, it is not easy to capture the sound from everybody in the room, and of course people are wearing masks, so...
Have the same principles and objectives.
Having the same principles and objectives, says Elga here from Quinta dos Açores. Which goes back to aligning interests, right? So we keep going either aligning interests or reducing risks as our two guiding rails for this collaborative train.
Clear communication.
Tiago Botelho from Picos da Ventura says a clear communication. So this again has come up 2 or 3 times now, communication, the ability to communicate. And funnily enough, we had a whole module on communication and how important that was to establish common ground and to have a clear vision and direction.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree with all of that. Thank you, guys.
Me too. I feel like it's been such a complementary, like the yin and the yang. I feel like the stories I was sharing were more like trying to paint a bigger picture, and some of the brushstrokes of contracts and soft law and hard law and all of that, almost the frame of the picture, both are important. So really welcome those additions. I appreciate that. So I think those were my final words that I'm of so much appreciation for. Really, it feels like, the collective wisdom. That's certainly not just for me. But thanks so much to Kirsten. Thanks also so much to Joanna. All your experience is so, so valuable. And of course, everyone in the room, and hopefully if there's anyone still on Facebook listening in, it takes a real collective
Jackie
to
and
find the
Kirsten.
answer.
Thank you both. We look forward to the next couple of days and continuing this journey with you. Can we please all show our appreciation
for our hosts, our distance. Oh, they're asking to see the dogs tomorrow, so that's going to have to be it.
I will try to get them the camera. They're quite big, so I can't put them on my lap.
We will post a photo. We will post a photo then on Facebook for all of those following us at a distance, who will not have the benefit and privilege of continuing this conversation with Jackie and with Kirsten. From all of us here in Terinov, thank you to both of you and to everyone listening to us at home. This was a grand finale to our 6 modules on sustainability management and leadership. And we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you.